If you know me, you know the Raptors are life for me. And guess what? They've been in existence for 31 years now. And my guest today is the one and only Eric Smith, the radio play by play voice of the team and co author of We The Raptors, the book that chronicles a city's rise to basketball greatness, from its origins to the championship run and everything else in between. Eric has been courtside for it all. Today, we're talking legacy, passion, and what it means to tell stories of a team and a nation through the game of basketball. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Passion Projects today. It's so nice to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get things started with your passion for the game of basketball. Where did that come from for you?
I mean, it started at a young age, and I sort of talked about it a little bit in the book. So if anybody's read the book or hopefully will read the book, this might end up being marginally repetitive. But I'm this weird Canadian kid that grew up in the '80s, in the early '80s, that wasn't a hockey player. I mean, even to this day, it seems like every kid born in this country at some point has a stick in their hand or more so skates on their feet. And it's not that I didn't learn to skate or that I didn't play road hockey almost every single day of my childhood, but I just never played the game at any significant level, whether it be, pee wee hockey, little bitty hockey, Timbits hockey is what they call it up here in Canada, Tim Hortons. I just never played. I was a kid that grew up on baseball and very quickly found a love for basketball. And I think it kind of started rooted in a lot of my family is from the US and from Michigan. And I think it became, as a young kid, Michigan State. That's all I ever heard about. And then, of course, Magic Johnson at Michigan State and then Magic Johnson in the NBA. And then quickly, all of a sudden, the early 80s, it's the Showtime Lakers. And the NBA is starting to kind of take off again, buoyed by Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and the great battles. And all of a sudden, then on the heels of them comes Michael Jordan. And I got captured by the game early. And we were, my family, my mom and dad and my brother, we were one of very few families at the time that had a hoop in their driveway. And it started off on the eaves trough on the carport, and that eventually graduated to an actual pole in the ground, cemented in with a fiberglass backboard and things like that. And I don't know. I fell in love with the game at a young age, and I credit Magic Johnson. I mean, that's the picture right behind me there. It was a gift from my wife years ago. It might be if I say it might be, I look around. It's the only autograph piece I have, and it wasn't even me in my job or through my job trying to meet and get an autograph. It was like she bought that for me years ago off some collector site or something and bought it for me. But that's kind of the homage to that's my childhood hero and the guy that sort of hooked me into the game. And then it just sort of took off from there, playing at various levels. Never good enough to play at any significant level, clearly. And I just kind of somehow magically, in worlds colliding and lightning striking, found my way into a career in basketball that kind of started at a young age, just as a fan of the game and a kid that grew up on basketball and baseball more than anything else. Suddenly here we are 30, 35, 40 years later, finding myself working in both sports in a sense and making my life and my career of that.
Amazing. It takes me back to like me as well. Like I can totally relate to your story. Baseball and basketball were my first loves as well. Like for some reason, growing up in Canada too, I never took to hockey. I know in the book you mentioned like equipment was so expensive too to like just facilitate going to a rink or anything like that. So my brother and I would shoot hoops in our backyard as well, pretend like we were MJ, I'm sure at the buzzer beater game moments. So that is so relatable and a big piece in the book for sure. I want to know though, what inspired you to write this book?
So, I mean, I've said to myself, we've got to find a way to shorten this story for if I do any other interviews and whatnot. So you might have to settle in for a bit of a longer story, but I'll try to tighten it up, I guess, a little bit. So the co-author, Andrew Bricker, is actually my brother-in-law. And my wife is the eldest of three. Andrew is her middle brother. She has another younger one as well. But Andrew, so I didn't even meet my wife till I was almost 30 years old. I didn't know her in high school. I didn't even know her in college. It was after, college, university that I met her. So I certainly didn't know her brothers at any, significant point in my life, and certainly not in high school. But the story on Andrew goes, and if he was on this show, he might disagree with this assessment. But the story that at least I hear through my wife and through getting to know him over the years is he was an okay student, but he was more focused on music and being in a band and skateboarding and tattoos and just kind of living the rock and roll grunge life and whatever else. And all of a sudden, kind of in university, a light clicked for him, and he found himself kind of inspired and motivated, and suddenly decided to go for his PhD in this and his master's in that, and ended up staying in school for damn near 15 years, and ended up going to school down at Stanford, and yada 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 yada. And the story unfolds that Andrew is now a English history professor at the University of Ghent in Belgium. So quite a turn in his life in terms of where he was in high school to where he is now. Like you see him in his little Oxford cloth shirts and all buttoned up and looking proper. But if he rolls up the sleeves or, jumps in the pool or something, he's just covered up in tats from his old rock and roll life. So this English history professor in Belgium is on a Zoom call with my wife and chatting with his sister and my son, his nephew, and we're kind of having a chat during COVID, going back a number of years, and just doing the typical catch up of him overseas and us in Canada. And he and I end up on the phone for a little bit, or on the Zoom chatting. And he says to me, "I got to tell you, I'm so kind of tired right now of just writing about English history and writing and doing the same thing. I'm looking for something fun to do, maybe something that's a bit more of a passion project or something. I wonder if there's something we could collaborate on. I'm thinking of this idea of maybe you and I could like write a book together." I said, it took me back because I've never thought about writing a book ever. And
Yeah.
I said, well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure if that's something that, and I kind of brushed it aside. And then maybe a week or two later, we get on a call again. And he's like, I was serious about what I said. I really think we could do something. And I kind of pushed it aside again. And I was like, I don't even know what I would do. Because in my mind, and I don't want to say I'm arrogant about it, but I was thinking, he's maybe thinking it's like my story or my, biography or something. I'm like, nobody, first of all, I don't think anybody would be that interested in my story and writing a book about it, and like, let alone people buying a book about it. But I also think that's something you do when you're not that I'm not young anymore, but I like to still think I'm young. But I think that's something you do when you're old, or when you're retired, or when you're like, a couple of years from your deathbed or something. Like, oh, I better put my memoirs out or tell my story. I'm like, man, I'm too young to be writing a book. So, but again, I was thinking it might have been about me. Not to sound again arrogant about that. As we started flushing it out a little bit more and kind of hashing out some details of what he was thinking and what I was thinking, if I even went down this road, we started trying to bounce around some ideas. And this is what I came up with, Payal, is that every city, I don't care if you're down in Miami or in Boston or New York, or if you're in Madrid, or if you're in Toronto or Vancouver or, London, UK, whatever it may be, I think we always have these arguments as sports fans. Arguments, conversations, sometimes arguments about who's the top three, who's the top five, who's the top 10, who's the Mount Rushmore in X franchise's history. And I said, what if we did though, or what if we focused on guys that maybe weren't in the top five, but clearly had an impact on the franchise and or on the fan base and or on the organization. And I find that Toronto is very unique in that. Hold on, I'm going to put this on pause for a second. I'm going to put you on the spot. And obviously, this isn't planned, folks. I'm going to put Payal on the spot here. Tell me in no order.
Yeah.
Tell me in no order the top 5 players in Raptors franchise history.
Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Kawhi.
You're forgetting one real big one for sure.
I know. Who am I forgetting?
DC.
Yeah.
Right? Sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It is Vince Carter, right? You would have put him in top 5.
It is Vince Carter. And I was going to say Tracy McGrady.
Okay. So I'll say this. You're the first person. Now, the name I'm about to give you, you can tell me if you agree or disagree. You're the first person that has given me one name that I don't have in my 5, and that everybody else, literally everybody else that I say to this question to, has said Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Vince Carter, Kawhi Leonard, Chris Bosh. Those are the five. Now, again, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with your Tracy McGrady, but you at least hit four of the five, and that's again maybe where this conversation comes up. But here's the point of me talking about this, and again using this analogy of we're doing it right now, the argument of the top three, top five, Mount Rushmore, top 10. You would know this from your time in Toronto, and again, folks watching this in any city could probably relate to in their respective cities and the teams that they cheer for. But again, this is very Toronto centric. When you look out into the stands at Air Canada Centre, now Scotiabank Arena, you would see Jonas Valanciunas jerseys and Patrick Patterson jerseys and TJ Ford jerseys and Charlie Villanueva and Jerome Williams and Antonio Davis and Norm Powell. And the list goes on, right? It seems like Toronto, and I'm not saying Toronto is unique. Again, a lot of people could say this about their respective city, but Toronto has this image that's been painted, I think, by a lot of Canadians that, oh, Toronto's the center of the universe in Canada, and they look down on the rest of us, and the high and mighty Canadians in Toronto, yada yada. I think Toronto is very much a blue collar city that appreciates the hard workers and the role players and the grinders as much, if not more, than the stars. Yeah, they love their Matt Sundins and Doug Gilmores and Austin Matthews and Jose Batistas and Joe Carters and Vladimir Guerreros and Vince Carters and Kyle Lowrys and Kawhi Leonards and DeMar DeRozans, etc. But they also love JYD and Norm Powell and Patrick Patterson and John McDonald, and back in the day, a Rance Mullenix or a Homer Bush, or Mark Osborne and Ty Domi and all, like the list goes on. We love those guys that bring their lunch pail, that do the dirty work. Think right now, even with the Toronto Blue Jays, Ernie Clement and Nathan Lucas and Davis Schneider, the guys that are helping get it done, not just the Vladdies and the stars of the Blue Jays on this World Series run that the Jays are hopefully on. So when I started thinking about that, I thought, we hear the story, and I say this respectfully. This is not a negative at all. We have heard and still hear the story of the Raptors and the story of the stars. We've heard a lot about Kyle Lowry and Kawhi Leonard and DeMar DeRozan and Chris Bosh and Vince Carter and even Tracy McGrady and more. But have we heard about all of the other guys? And there are so many other guys. So I said to Andrew, what if this was the book? What if we did a book on the other guys? And I kind of used the line from the old movie in the 90s, I think late 90s, maybe early 2000s, but I think it was late 90s, Swingers, with Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau. And, it's kind of a more of a dating analogy, but the guy behind the guy, instead of focusing on the guy that's right here, what about the guy behind the guy? What about all these other guys behind the stars that had as much importance? Because without those various players, you're not winning X amount of games. You're not winning X series. You're not winning the championship without the contributions of some of these guys. And what if we focused on telling their stories? And what if we told sort of a quasi history of the team through their eyes and through their lens? And then when we focused on that topic and that focus for what the narrative of the book was going to be, or the kind of central point of the book was going to be, it kind of started to come together very quickly in our minds. It was a matter of whether anybody was going to be interested. And when we actually pitched this book to various publishers, I'm proud to say, and again, I don't want to come across as cocky by saying this, we actually had 5 offers from 5 different publishers because it was a popular idea and they liked the thought of where this could ultimately go. I didn't want this to be like a coffee table book, with all due respect to coffee table books. I didn't want this to be like some pictures and a little bird like, then this happened in 2002, and then flip the page, and then this happened. So I wanted to be more just kind of a story of the team and almost like 30 short stories. And why we focused on the 30, that's the only real tie-in to the 30th anniversary of the team. So the last year was the 30th anniversary season of the Raptors. But now, as you and I sit here right now, they have 30 years in the books. We're now into year 31, but yes, they have officially 30 years in the books, no pun intended. So I wanted to try and get 30 guys, not one per season, but just 30 guys to span the various eras and the various historic moments of the team, and tell those little moments and tell those eras, but also tell their story through their eyes. And I think that, I hope that the book has come together as a collection almost of short stories where, heck, if you have the time and the wherewithal to sit down and read this thing from cover to cover in one sitting or in 1 week, good for you. But I also think it's the kind of book where you could say, like, I'm gonna read this chapter on Gravis Vasquez and just put it down. Give me 10 minutes, go back to it the next day. Or, you know what? I'm going to flip forward and see what Danny Green had to say, and then flip backwards and see what Tracy Murray. I think it's kind of cool that way, that you can kind of just come in and out of it and grab and capture and hopefully be, I don't know, captivated might be a little too strong, but at least interested in these little short stories that ultimately come together to tell the bigger story of the 30 years of this team and the impact that the players had and the fan base in turn had on the organization, on the city, on the province, the country, et cetera, et cetera.
Listen, it captivated me. Like, I have all these little sticky notes here that I'm just amazed by too. Like, there's some conversations, especially I remember John Thomas and calling him the big kitchen, and his story is just so interesting to me about, I don't know if he felt like he had to follow his father's footsteps in wanting to play the game, and then came to a point where, he really missed it after he was done playing. And I was just like, oh, like, that's so interesting to me, because I always thought of him as this glue guy. Like, he would contribute when needed, was a solid player during that era of the Toronto Raptors, but a solid story for sure. Which kind of brings me to how you went about picking, I guess, the 30 players that you wanted to feature within this book.
There was no. This is the most honest answer I can give you. There was such a wide net that could be cast, because there are clearly so many guys that have come through this team over the course of the 30 years, and there's a lot of factors. One was, what's my relationship with player X? Two is, how potentially attainable is player X? And then three, ultimately, is their story, and not to say that there are bad stories by any means. Everybody, and I don't want to sound cheesy about it, everybody's got a story, and it's just a matter of how you tell your story. I think that's probably what a great deal about what your show is all about, is people telling their story of their life, and it's your job to try and pull it out of people, right? So
Yeah.
everybody has a story. But I'll be honest with you as well. Part of it was, who gets back to me. So if I cast the wide net, like I'm telling you, Pyle, I could show you the list of at least 50, if not 60 guys
Yeah.
that said yes, and that said, I'm in. Thanks. Yeah, great. Good to hear from you. Oh, this is cool. Yeah, absolutely. Hit me up. Let's do this. And then a week or a month or 2 or 3 months go by, and follow up with said player, like, hey, you still interested? Yeah, man, we should do this. Okay, how about tomorrow? How about 3 days from now? How about next week? And then time goes by. Like, I'll tell you, maybe I shouldn't say it, but I will say it, because again, I'm not criticizing the guy. If he happens to watch this at any point, Mo, I love you. I got all the time in the world for Morris Peterson. If Mo Pete walked into a gym right now and saw me, I guarantee he would come over and he'd either shake my hand, give me a high five, hug me, and ask me how my wife and kid are and how's the family, and I'd be doing the same, and we'd be catching up like old time. I've known this guy forever. I've gotten to know him a little bit personally away from the court through some broadcasting stuff and whatnot. I know the guy well.
Mm-hmm.
He is a guy that, to me, absolutely, I don't want to say should have, but absolutely could have and should have been in the book. Like, that's one of the guys, when I talk about the role players and the guys that, how many 24 jerseys, Morris Peterson, did you see in the stands back in the day? Tons.
Yeah.
He's like the running mate next to Vince so much, but he's not in the book. And that's simply because schedules did not jive and we couldn't work out a time, or I got ghosted for a while, and then he suddenly reappeared and whatnot. So there are situations like that where the selection process at times was, who's actually committing to this, and who's actually, can I lock down to get this done? But I also think that if I take a step back and look at it from an even bigger lens, and I think my brother-in-law said this in another interview did a couple of days ago, and I'm gonna completely mess it up and maybe misrepresent the way he said it. But this is a collection of stories. It's not an encyclopedia. So it could have been 30 completely different guys. And that doesn't take away from the 30 that are in the book that have stories of their own outright and impact that they made that clearly comes out in the stories that were told. So again, as I say, it's not an encyclopedia. So it wasn't necessarily about let's hit this guy and this guy and this guy, and let's make sure we tell this story and this story and this story, because it was let's tell these stories. And you know what? If opportunity presents itself, whether it be at 35 or 40 or 45 or 50, I don't know if I'm in the books or in the market to write another book, but
Yeah, I was
maybe
just gonna say,
maybe
you
it's a
may,
chance to tell more stories. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I think
yeah,
that's the way to look at it more so, as opposed to thinking about
definitely.
who was or wasn't selected. It was simply just these were the guys that were selected, and it wasn't intended ever to be an encyclopedia.
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh, in the guys that you had a chance to speak with, was there a particular story that might have surprised you or moved you when writing or interviewing them?
It'd be impossible to pick one because you already hit on one of them,
Yeah.
and I again I don't mean to show any disrespect to the various guys that shared all of their stories, because I could give you a little tidbit about literally every guy. But right off the top of my head, what stands out more than any is how personal and then or thus emotional a number of players got that I wasn't necessarily expecting. You know,
Oh,
most of the interviews I would say lasted at least 2 hours. Some of them
wow.
went on for 3 or 4 hours, or it was an hour and a half here, and then a couple of days later, another 30 minutes, or another hour, or another hour and a half. Like there were multiple follow up interviews then. In fact, one of the guys I'll mention, you talked about John Thomas, and clearly the emotions of what he dealt with his father, and then leaving the game and after actually stepping away from basketball, then finding his way back to basketball, and somehow, some way, finding his way back into the NBA a second time, which to
Right.
me is wild.
Yeah.
And I think about even Mike James and you know the conversations with his children and the internal battle that he had trying to think that he had to prove himself. Um, but the one that I was going to mention that absolutely stood out was Chris Childs,
Yeah,
and
I was thinking that
you
one
know
too.
his family and battles with addiction and his marriage and whatnot. And he's a guy I can tell you when I talk about follow ups. Let's say last fall of 2024, the Raptors were in Montreal for training camp. And I was out with a friend that lives in the area. It was after midnight. We were sitting at a bar having a drink, and my phone rings, and I look down, and on my call display, Chris Childs. My interview with Chris Childs. So this would have been October of 2024. My interview with Chris Childs, I think I'd have to look back and confirm this for sure. But I think my interview with Chris Childs, the last one that I did, was in either late July or early August. So it was at least 2 months, if not 3 months after our interview. And out of the blue, Chris Childs at like midnight on a Thursday night in October. So I looked, I'm like, man, I don't know if I should take this or not. It's freaking midnight. But
Yeah.
okay, hello. He's like, Eric, it's Chris. I'm like, and I knew Chris Childs. If he had just said it's Chris, I'm like, Chris who? But I saw Chris Childs. He's like,
Yeah.
you got time to talk. I got a few more things I want to say. But
Wow.
sure, I'm not going to say no. I mean, as I said, it was hard enough trying to get guys and lock them down. So if somebody's actually calling me and wants to share more stories, sure. I didn't. Every single interview in the book, every single one, was done like this over some kind of recording platform, Zoom or otherwise. So I have everybody on tape, I have everybody on video. So it was, and I thought that was important to not just do it over the phone, because I think being able to look in somebody's eyes, even if it's through a lens, being able to see somebody makes a difference and makes it more personal. There's more of a connection, etc. That was the only interview in the entire book that wasn't done on video. It was a follow up. In fact, it might have been the second or third follow up. But that was the only one, and that was like hand scribbled notes on like napkins from the bar, and me trying to type on my phone as fast as I could while I'm sort of listening like this, standing like outside a bar in an alley in Montreal, trying to keep up with what Chris is saying. So it's moments like that as well where you just think about how honest the players were and how forthcoming they were with the information, and how they just kind of were willing to reveal themselves away from the court, let alone the on court or career related stuff. It got very personal with a lot of guys.
I was gonna say, I mean, did you feel like once their playing days were over, like they were willing to share more than maybe active players right now in the league?
I think so, and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of natural as well to some
Yeah.
extent, right? Because even and you know you've been in this world as well. Is even from a writer or a broadcaster standpoint, or a coach or a trainer or whatever. There's always that either it could be A, simply just respect. It could be B, fear. It could be C, uneasiness. It could be any number of things of should I say that? Should I reveal this? Can I say that? Can I reveal this? What's fair game or not fair game? What is
Mhm.
behind the velvet curtain? What is okay to reveal? So you end up being kind of guarded, and from a player standpoint, I would assume you don't want to be talking smack about teammates. You don't want to be talking dirt about opposition. You don't want to be giving any ammunition to anybody for anything. So hence the reason we often talk about from a media perspective, you know, trying to dig in and not get the typical cliched answers or the X's and O's answers. And then we end up talking more about the game, et cetera, and just, you know, game 1 to game 2 to game 12 to game 52 to game blah, 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 blah. And it just
Yeah.
becomes kind of monotonous at times. But I can understand why it does. Because if I was on the other side, am I going to want to be like as extremely honest and open as you want me to be in the midst of a season, in the middle of a career? Probably not. But
No.
when my playing career is over and I've retired and I've stepped away from the game and I've made my money and I have time to reflect on
Mhm.
hopefully more pro than con, but even on the con, all right, maybe now I'm a little more open and willing to talk about certain things. So, not to say that the players in this book that are still currently playing in the NBA weren't honest and open. I think they were. I think of Jonas Valanciunas, and I think of
Oh,
Norm Powell. I think of R.J. Barrett and what he ended up talking to me about, especially with the passing of his brother. Like that was
yeah.
extremely honest and personal.
Yeah.
They were very, very forthcoming and very open to share a lot of their lives in general. But to your point, I think the retired players absolutely were open, and I think they appreciated being asked to be involved in something like this and to share why their little piece, however big their piece was of the overall Raptors pie, why it was important and why it
Mhm.
did matter. And I think that made them feel special as well, that, you know, they're being remembered for something and they're being asked to share their story. And I think we'd all be like that, you know, like if you're still doing this or doing something somewhat similar in, I don't know, 20 years. Maybe I'm not retired in 20 years. I don't know. But I would think that I'd be like, yeah, shoot, I'd love to come on and tell some stories from back in my day and whatever else. Cause, you know, it kind of feels nice to be remembered and to still feel, um, I don't know. I don't want to say relevant, but you know what I mean? Like to be
Oh, yeah.
remembered and to be revered to some extent still.
Exactly. I like the book touches on so many different themes from legacy, community, belonging. Um, and one of the common themes, of course, was how much players just loved being in Toronto. And, there's with the caveat of Kenny Anderson, but why do you think it was so important to highlight that aspect?
Because I think we often find that even after 30 years, and I'm sure that some or many of your audience is, you know, either from the U.S. or from other pockets of the world, and maybe not just Canadians. But there's often this stigma that gets attached to
Mhm.
Canada that we as Canadians, I think, also stick on ourselves, thinking like, and again, especially in the NBA and especially in Major League Baseball, since the Expos have been gone, you know, since what, 95, I believe 94 was their last season.
Yeah.
Um, being the only team outside of the United States. It might be a little bit different in hockey. There's 7 Canadian NHL teams, and hockey is still considered this Canadian sport. So it's almost like the all of the 20 plus American teams feel like they're the outsider sometimes because it's, you know, there's so many Canadians that are mad about hockey. But in Canada, it's different with the NBA and with Major League Baseball. And I think that there's this stigma attached, and oftentimes it's more of a negative stigma than a positive. And whether it be the exchange rate or the dollar, or whether it be the
Mhm.
French instead of Spanish, or whether it be you know, the weather and the cold, all this stuff, and it's almost across the board. I can't say it's 100%, but almost across the board, it gets debunked or thrown out the window by almost everybody you talk to, including all the players who say, yeah, okay, it might be cold, but you know what? it's cold as hell in Boston and New York and Chicago and Milwaukee and Minnesota. Like, take a look at the Eastern Conference and look at the 15 teams. And outside of Miami and Orlando,
LA.
I was talking just the East, but yeah,
Oh,
of course, LA and Phoenix and whatnot. Like,
yeah.
I'd say, I'd argue, I'd have to do the actual math, but at least 60, if not 75% of the Eastern Conference and maybe even the league
Mm-hmm.
is rooted in cities where it gets pretty darn cold and pretty much snows in at least half the league. Why is it that it's the Great White North? I mean,
Right?
Toronto's climate is very similar to New York and Boston's, but a lot of people just stick on like cold, 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 cold.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think that unfairly, that perception becomes reality. And I'm not here as the Canadian guy to rag on the American people by any means. That's not my intention. But I think that some of that perception becomes reality, and then that just gets spoken into existence, and that's the way it is. How many people have actually been up here to visit, though? How many people have actually seen what it's like? I'll tell you, if we were doing the same show or the same kind of book about the Toronto Blue Jays, I think the narrative would be not entirely different, but it would be different because one major component probably doesn't factor in, and that's the weather. Because it might not be the greatest in April and it might not be the greatest in October, but it's not snowing in either one of those months. And it's not, nobody's shoveling in either one of those months. And you tell me if you've ever been to Toronto in certainly July, August, September, but even in May and June and whatever, it's gorgeous. Like, I'm here to tell any people that don't know, Toronto between like May 1st and October 1st, I could say 15th, but October 1st, it's gorgeous and the sun is out. And in the dead of the summer, it's, with the humidity, it's 95, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's disgustingly sweaty every single day. So we have gorgeous weather and sunshine for 5 to 6 months of the year. It's not like it's snow and winter for 10 months and there's only 2 months of happiness. Like, I think we've gotten to a point, and this is maybe a different conversation for a different show for a different day, climate change or otherwise, I don't know. But I feel like we're now at a point where we're like 5 months of summer, 2 months of fall, 3 months of winter, 2 months of spring. Like, that's kind of where we're at least in Toronto. I can't speak to Edmonton and Calgary or Nunavut or whatever else, but at least in Toronto, I'd say 5 months of summer, 3 months of fall, or 2 months of fall, 3 months of winter, 2 months of spring. So that's what it is. Anyway, I went way too far on the weather topic here, but I think that telling the story of the impact that the players themselves felt about the city was important, because we often just talk about how important the players were to the fans, why the fans like the players. Well, it to me became almost is it fair to call it? I don't know, maybe I'm using the wrong term here, but like a symbiotic relationship here where the players themselves felt as attached to the fans as the fans did to the players, because of how the community, in spite of it being the 5th largest market in North America, I think that's still an accurate stat. In spite of how large the city is, it still feels very much like a community, and a smaller community where guys can be recognized, but also left alone, where guys can be respected and revered, but also looked at as everyday guys on top of that. So I think they appreciate that about the Toronto fan base. And the interesting thing that I found as well was the guys that spoke not just about Toronto, but especially the guys that maybe had been here a little bit longer, or the guys that were here during the We the North era, when the team, the organization started to get out a little bit more. The guys that would mention without any prompting Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Halifax, in talking about other pockets of the country and not just Ontario, and specifically not just Toronto. But then the guys even that were talking about Toronto that would talk about the neighborhoods and the boroughs and specific restaurants and all these other things. The players that still have attachments to the country because they have kids that live here, or family that still lives here, or friends that were neighbors that they still keep in touch with and come back to visit, like we all would, visiting friends and neighbors from other cities where we might have lived. So the community aspect of the city itself left a long attachment to so many, if not most, of these guys. And I thought it was important to highlight that because I don't think it gets talked enough about.
I completely agree. And do you think that's why We the North, the identity, not only shaped the fans, but also the players in that sense?
I think so, yeah. And I think it was, listen, clearly I stole from it with the title of the book with We the Raptors, but I think the marketing campaign and the mantra and the battle cry of We the North, the we, and we sort of wrote this, I think, at one of the points in the book, the we is everybody. The
Yeah.
we is the fans. The we is the players. The we is the coaches. The we is literally everybody. We, anybody connected to, whether it be as a fan or as an employee, as a player, as a coach, as a broadcaster, as whatever, the we is you. The we is us. And I think that's, I don't know who the one person is, or if it was 3 or 5 or 10 people that collectively came up with it, but that We the North, when it started, it's just become like something unto itself that I think will never go away from this organization because it is so inclusive of we truly being everybody.
100%. I feel like it's so ingrained in me and growing up now from when it was created to having my son, encapsulated. Can you share a behind the scenes moment maybe that didn't make the book that sticks out to you?
Hmm. Honestly, I'm trying to. I should know this, and I don't know. Maybe it's just my brain being fried a little bit to some extent. I feel like we mentioned it, but maybe didn't go into as much detail. Um, the Matt Bonner chapter, like when I talked about doing multiple interviews and lengthy interviews, I think Bonner's might have been the longest, and that's not in a bad way
Yeah.
because if there's one person that I think can give me a run for my money in terms of long answers, as you've already seen and heard, and hopefully I'm not boring people here, Matt Bonner, I think one of his answers to one of my questions, I think I went back and tracked it afterwards, was like 16 minutes. Like
Wow.
he just kept going and just kept going and kept saying more and more and more and giving more detail. And the detail that he got into about his time overseas playing in Italy
Yeah. Yeah.
and the again, I don't. Well, not. I was going to say I don't know. I know we didn't give all of the details in the book of whether or not the team was or wasn't owned by the mafia is still maybe in question, and whether the team owner did or didn't have legit connections to some sort of family.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Matt's father confronting the team owner and getting right up in his face because he was trying to protect his son and look after his son who hadn't been paid and was trying to say, "Hey, you owe my kid money," and was like right up in the guy's face. And Matt trying to say, like, "Dad, you need to step back. You need to chill. Like it's okay. Like that's one that stands out. And I don't want to give too much detail because again, it was on the record and Matt told the story, but
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
it, it it was very interesting. Like I mean, I remember laughing through the whole thing, and especially with Matt, kind of the way he tells stories and the way he was sharing it. It was I thought it was a very funny moment, but it was also it's moments like that as well, Pyle, where you look at it and say some of those are great stories, but then you look and go like, well, heck, we could write then a 25 or 40 page chapter on Matt Bonner, and that's fine. Like it's okay if one chapter is 3 pages and one chapter is 7 or 10, but it's
Yeah.
trying to find the balance of keeping all of them within a certain range and knowing that our publisher said you have X amount of words and X amount of page space, etc. So trying to keep these as tight and then also not get too far off the focus, and that was the challenge at times is you want to tell the personal stories. You want to show the people that these players are, not just the athletes. But you also don't want to veer away from, you also want to tell the story of the Raptors. And not,
Mhm.
I don't even mean the organization, I just mean their time as Raptors because you got to try and be true to who you assume your audience is going to be for this book. Your readership is going to be Raptor fans, NBA fans, basketball fans that are going to want to hear about the basketball stories too. So hitting that fine line, that hopefully perfect balance of giving some of the personal, but giving some of the basketball. and knowing that you can only do it in a certain amount of words or space. So you're not necessarily allowed or afforded the opportunity to veer too far down this path, tell this story of this team in Italy, and only maybe give a little bit of a snippet. Like I would have loved, and maybe it's still something that's possible. The idea has been kind of kicked around, but I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. I would love to release the interviews in like an exclusive podcast or something, and have people have a chance to see all the interviews. I don't know. That might happen. That might happen. I don't know. But it's like I enjoy doing shows like this, because as much as like my career started in hosting shows and doing talk shows and doing pre-half and post-game shows and things like that. For the last 20 years, it's been almost entirely rooted in live broadcast and play-by-play, predominantly like 95% in basketball. In the last couple of years, doing some baseball stuff. But in spite of my career essentially being rooted in play-by-play now for 2/3 of my career, I love long-form conversations. Like if I was, I'm not saying I would leave play-by-play. I would try and find a way to do both or do 5 other things as well. But I would love. If anybody ever offered me like, hey, we'll you could have your own show and do stuff like this regularly. That's what I enjoyed about the book, was actually talking to the guys and having these long form conversations. And there's like I don't even know what this is on my desk here. This is a this is for my son. This is what is this? Oh, this is that he had to fill out for his volunteer driver declaration form. Oh, maybe that's for me. Maybe I was supposed to sign this for like some school trip. Anyways, I'm just using this as a prop. This is what I literally did. This is what I did every day or every interview that I did in this book. Same phone, same office, same setup. I would get somebody on the phone, Payal, and I would simply say, Alvin Williams, Al, or whoever, anybody, pick player X. As you can see, there is nothing written here. This is just you and me talking. Boom, record. I literally had no questions written for any player in any interview at all. I knew up here what I wanted to ask and where I wanted to go, but I went where the interview went. I went where the conversation went, and it was a very casual, laid back conversation with every single guy. Literally had 0 questions written for any guy. There was nothing on the desk, and I only kept a blank pad or paper to scribble little notes to myself or to Andrew, my co-author, if okay, make a highlight of this. That was it. But otherwise, nothing written, because I just wanted to react to what the conversation was. And if it went in a completely different direction than I was thinking, then I didn't care. That was a good thing, because it meant that we were having an honest conversation, and I let the player dictate where we went.
And that's the best part. That's just the way. I love how those conversations flow when you just like kind of go with the flow and see where things can go. I do want to know, like, when writing this book, what do you feel like you learned about yourself as well as the team through those decades?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is going to sound completely like arbitrary and basic and obvious. I learned I could write a book. I didn't think I could do that, but I will say I could not have written this book. 1000%, I could not have written this book without Andrew. Like, I did most of the heavy lifting with the interviews, and he did most of the heavy lifting with the writing. And then he was able to tweak and adjust some of the interviews or questions in the follow-ups, and I was able to tweak and adjust some of what was written and things that I wanted in or out. And like, it was very collaborative. But this book doesn't get written without him. I mean, first of all, he's the one that even broached the idea of a book, let alone the fact that his skills in writing and his command of the English language and his ability to write. Like, I'm a journalism grad. I'm not even, not that there's anything wrong with this to all my fellow broadcasters. I'm not even a broadcast journalism grad. I am a journalism graduate. I used to write as well. I have written for magazines and for newspapers and started off as a writer back in the day in post-secondary. But my career morphed into television and radio and broadcast journalism. So I feel like I can write, but could I have done all of this on my own and written an entire book? Absolutely not. Andrew was a superstar. And so I learned that also that I can be a team player and kind of trade off. And that might sound kind of obvious and or stupid to some people, but I don't know if you'd agree with this, Pyle. In at least in television and radio, a lot of times it's you. You might have a producer or a director, or in radio, an engineer, a technical director. And yes, we all have bosses to answer to some extent, but it, for the most part, oftentimes comes down to you. Can you do the job? Can you execute? Can you perform? Can you get the stand up done? Can you provide the proper play by play? Can you do a good interview? Can you write a good article? Can you get it done on deadline? Can you acquire? It's you. When you have to team with somebody and collaborate with somebody and share like that, and all of that work with your co-author is also reliant on the interviews and the subjects being uh, open and revealing, and you having the ability to pull things out of them. I think I learned a lot of things about myself as an interviewer and as a writer, and just as a person, and being able to connect with. Because here's another one. I feel like I've said this too many times, but again, I kind of preface this by saying I don't want to come across as cliche or cheesy. But I believe that I get caught to this day still sometimes looking at athletes as different than you or I, simply because they make a whack of money.
Yeah.
And that's not fair of me, and that's not fair of anybody that does that. So I learned to find a way, even more than ever before, even though I've been doing this for damn near 30 years, covering professional sports and being around athletes, to find a way to say to myself and go, you know what? They all put their pants on one leg at a time, just like we do, and they all put their socks on one foot at a time, just like we do, and they all have hey, maybe some of them have people that are doing this for them, but they gotta buy their groceries and cook their food, and they gotta run their errands and take care of their kids, and the ones with young ones, they gotta change diapers, and they gotta deal with like crying kids and sick kids, and like they all got the problems. The only difference is they got a couple more zeros on their paycheck, or many more zeros on their paycheck than you and I, but they're still human beings, and they're still dealing with everything that we deal with to a certain level, right? And trying to look at them on that much more of a human level, because most often I'm dealing with these people between the lines and the X's and O's. So getting a chance to get to know them as people even more so than as players, that was something that I respected and appreciated, and I guess learned through the process of doing it.
And with that being said, do you find that there was one player whose story felt truly encapsulating the Raptors' journey?
Um,
Maybe from like an unknown to a global success?
I don't know if there's one necessarily that stands out. I think that I'll give you a couple examples of like one might be quasi obvious to some extent because it involves a Canadian guy. And I would say thinking about Jamal McGlure as a Torontonian and playing at Eastern Commerce and then going down to the States for university and then having his career in the NBA, reach the pinnacle of being an all-star and then ultimately come and end with the Raptors, and then still being there as a coach on the championship, and then still being there involved today as a community ambassador with the squad. And really outside of, yes, a good chunk of his life being at Kentucky and in the States playing for various teams in the NBA, the Hornets and the Heat and the Blazers, and the list goes on. But having it come back to Toronto and bookending his life with the city of Toronto, I think that is he's been here, whether it be as a kid or now as a professional, through the entire 30 years. I think that's an interesting one. And again, another guy that got very personal with the moments that he had, especially as a teenager in growing up, and then dealing with it as a young man with his sibling dying as well, and dealing with that. So again, another personal story. But I think if I was to really latch on to one, and this might be because of all the players, again, I've gotten to know a lot of these guys over the years before talking to them for this book. And I think that's part of the reason why they were willing to, is that hopefully there was that trust of, yeah, I know Eric. I know what he's all about. I know he's trustworthy. I'm willing to talk to him. I'm willing to open up to him. So hopefully that's something that without trying to pat myself on the back too hard, breaking my arm, I hope that there was a trust here, and that's part of the reason that they agreed to be involved in this and that they were so open. But of all the guys, the one that I've gotten to know the most, and the guy that I truly call a friend now to this day, is Alvin Williams. Like, Al and I were already fairly tight in his post playing career because of connections we had made through broadcasting and work that he had started to do at Sportsnet years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
And then there was kind of a lull in between, and all of a sudden now he is, and has been for a number of years now, the television analyst for the Sportsnet broadcast. So I already knew a lot about Al on a personal level. I already had a friendship with him, but in talking to him and thinking about his upbringing, where he, to his, to his own, in his own words, and admitted, like, he was fortunate enough that he did grow up in a stable household with both parents, and a dad who worked for, in security for Major League Baseball, and a family where that was very tight, and they were strict, and he was brought up in, he went to a private school in the Philadelphia area, because he was kind of pried away because of his basketball skills and whatever else. But again, rooted in family. But then goes from Philadelphia to Portland, and then traded from Portland to Toronto in the midst of all the Kenny Anderson stuff that you referenced earlier, and the chaos of the early years of the Raptors, and the bumps that he then went through with trying to find his role with Butch Carter, and couldn't really get through and crack through, and then found his guy in Lenny Wilkens, who handed him the reins, and then his career seeming to take off, and then the knee issues, and then getting traded, but then the trade falls through, and then he's back with the Raptors, and then he, latches on in post-playing career in player development, and then he's eventually an assistant coach, and then eventually he's gone, but then he's brought back as a broadcaster. There's just so many things that he has had to adjust to, and so many different things he's seen from all these different lenses, and I think that's maybe where I'm not comparing myself at all to Alvin Williams, but if you try to find the connections of, like, my career starting sort of around the same time his did in the early years as pre, half, and post, and then eventually becoming the play-by-play broadcaster, but doing some television along the way, and then changing roles and working in so many different facets, and seeing the good and seeing the bad and seeing the great and seeing the championship and living all those moments. I feel like he's maybe the guy that has experienced the most of all of the eras of the history of this team, because he's been a part of almost every single one in some way, shape, or form, and arguably in a different capacity in each chunk of his life, let alone his career.
I would wear his jersey because number 20 was one of my favorite numbers. So he was a true inspiration. I remember my one stint I had in high school making the team where I wore number 20 because he did. And like, there's just so many relatable aspects to his game and what he means to the city. And that's how I associated myself as well.
I totally agree with you. I'll tell you. Sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah.
He said, not for even for this book. I remember him saying this to me years ago. In fact, it might have been when he was a player, and I was, just sticking a microphone in his face with the rest of the media.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've referenced this a couple of times, even just having a beer with him or something like that. I remember it stands out where he once said that he would die on the court. And like, if that's what it took, he would die on the court. That's how much he loved the game, and how much he loved the team. And I always thought, like, it's kind of like, yeah, really. And I've asked him, he goes, no, it's like, I would do whatever it took. He was the first one that told me about microfracture surgery, because I remember when he had microfracture surgery on his knee, and what microfracture surgery actually was. And he's explaining to me how, they drill holes in the knee, and how the congealed blood basically becomes your new cartilage. And you don't technically have cartilage in your knee anymore, but this congealed blood becomes like your cartilage, and that is microfracture. Like, all these little things about Al and some of the story. I'll tell you another one. This might have anything to do with what we're talking about, or really have anything to do with the book. But I remember sitting. You'd have to look up the date for sure, but I want to say it was 2006. I think.
Okay.
Might have been 2007, but either way, when Alvin, his playing days were just about done, and he had latched on with the Los Angeles Clippers on a 10-day contract, and the Raptors happened to be in LA. And again, prefacing this, folks, I would never be staying at these hotels. I'm staying at like I'm staying where you're staying. I'm staying at the affordable places because that's what my budget is. The only reason I'm about to say a real snooty hotel name is because the NBA, the players and the teams, they stay at 5-star places. And I was, as a team broadcaster, I'm traveling with the team. I'm fortunate enough to stay at these places that I could never afford. So '06 or whenever it was, I'm sitting in the lobby bar at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Beverly Hills, right at the corner of Rodeo Drive and I guess it's Wilshire. But it's the Pretty Woman Hotel, So,
Yeah,
anyways,
yeah, yeah.
real fancy glitz and glamour hotel, and I'm sitting at the lobby bar at the bar with Jack Armstrong, the Raptors television broadcaster, and Jack and I came in together on the radio, and we're sitting at the bar, and it was the night of the Oscars. So there's nobody in the bar because anybody that's anybody in LA and Hollywood is either at the Oscars or at home watching the Oscars. But Jack and I are just at the bar having a drink. And as we're sitting there, there's, I don't know, maybe 5-10 people in the bar. And I kind of just happened to look over as in walks Rod Stewart with a girl and a woman on either arm. And he sits down and he's kind of, chatting with these ladies and whatever else. And I'm thinking like, holy crap, like Rod Stewart's like 5 feet away from me, whatever. And I kind of elbowed Jack and he's like, oh yeah, Rod Stewart. Like, okay, whatever. Like Jack's like, all about sports. He's a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, Billy Joel, I guess, but Beatles. But yeah, okay, no, Rod Stewart. Literally, maybe a minute later, like less than a minute later, Alvin Williams comes just randomly walking into the lobby bar, and I was looking kind of to my left, and Jack was looking good, and all of a sudden, Alvin! And Jack screams out, and Rod Stewart, let alone the other 5-10 people in the bar in freaking Beverly Hills, are like, "What the hell? Why is this guy screaming?" And Al's kind of sheepishly got his head down, and Jack's like, "Alvin Williams!" And he gets up from the bar and he goes over and gives Alvin a big hug, and then I go over, slap five with Alvin, shake his hand. Hey man, what's up? How you doing? And is this going to happen with the Clippers? But that just to me spoke to how important Alvin was just as a person, let alone as a player within at least our little world. Maybe most people probably, with respect to Alvin, most people probably wouldn't react the same way to Alvin Williams. But for a guy like Jack, seeing Alvin Williams was more exciting than being in Beverly Hills and seeing Rod Stewart walk into the bar. And I think that just speaks to, again, maybe us as sports people, as fans, as broadcasters, but also speaks to how good of a guy that Alvin Williams was, that you're that excited to see him and to talk to him and share stories with him and whatnot. So again, I don't know if that really plays into the book or what we're talking about, but I just thought it was kind of a funny story that has always stuck out for me, excuse me, regarding Alvin Williams and that Rod Stewart moment.
I love that. That is something I feel I would totally do as well. That's so genuine, I find. I love it. And I love Jack. He's the best.
Yeah, he is.
I guess when it comes to this book, what do you hope younger fans maybe only know about the championship era take away from reading this?
I hope they get the history of what this team was all about, because, and I'll tell you, I can speak to, like you're getting an early taste of it with your 4-year-old. My son is now 16.
Yeah.
So, he was born in 2009. So he was born just before, in his fandom, if we kind of do a rough comparison to say when my kid was 4 versus your kid being 4 now.
Yeah.
That was right when things were starting to kind of turn for the Raptors.
Mm-hmm.
So he's pretty much only ever known good and positive. He was 10 when they won the championship. He was at an NBA Finals game. He was at the parade and the millions of people with the trophy and whatnot. And he sees dad working and covering and broadcasting for a very good team and a championship team. So he's only ever seen the good, but it might be a little bit different because he lives in this household and because of the job I do. He does know about the other years, and he does know players from the other years. Like, this might be a bad example because he is clearly such a well-known player and still such an icon. but my son's favorite jersey to wear is still his Vince Carter jersey, and he has a Vince Carter poster on his wall. Well, Vince was around before my kid was born, so I hope that that younger fans can just use this as an appreciation for the guys that blazed the trail for this current generation, and to realize that every single guy in some way, shape, or form laid a brick or helped lay that foundation for where it's at right now. And I think that you can get a glimpse of that through some of the eyes of the players that are in this book that are still playing in the league or that recently retired, that have that sort of connection or bridge to the then and the now. And I hope that the younger fans can get a sense of that and realize, and again, not to sound kind of, like all fluffy about it, but as we noted earlier, I hope they can take away that everybody has a story, including you, whoever's watching this, whoever's maybe reading the book. The proof is right there in the pages that you yourself, I don't care if you're 12 or 16 or 20 or 25 or 30, not only do you already have a story, you have multiple stories that haven't been written yet. And whatever it is you do in your life, whatever job you have or will have one day, you're going to make an impact. It's on you to kind of make that impact and make it as successful or as big or small as it's going to be. But still, you have a story to tell, and these players are no different. So I hope they walk away with that sense and to see what this little thing grew into, and how big it now is.
And finally, what's your personal We the Raptors moment? That instant where you felt part of something bigger than basketball?
There's many.
Yeah.
My rookie season, Charlie Villanueva said this in the interview I did with him. So Charlie was on the team in his one and only season with the Raptors.
Yeah.
When Toronto goes to LA and Kobe puts up 81 on the Raptors. That was my rookie season on the broadcast as well. So Charlie starts telling the story of Kobe's 81, and I jumped in at one point. I said, so I referenced the Magic Johnson picture on my wall here earlier. At the time, things are different now, right? Like today, whether it be Snapchat, Twitter/X, Instagram, TikTok, the list goes on. It's pictures, it's videos, it's social media. The cameras and the phones are out all the time, including with broadcasters and writers and people in game. And heck, sometimes we've even seen players in game and whatnot. Just craziness. It's a different world we live in. But back in the day, to sound like the old guy, going back 20 years ago, if not longer, it was like a cardinal sin. It was a rule. You do not take a picture at a game. You do not pull out your phone. You do not. And I remember being there. So I'm a rookie in my first year. I had done pre-half and post for 7 years. Then Chuck Swirsky and Jack Armstrong move on to television. Paul Jones and I eventually take over on the broadcast. We just started our 21st season together calling games. The longest serving broadcast duo in Raptors franchise history. So that's kind of cool, a little feather in our cap, something that we're proud of. So, but that was my rookie year. And so being the young dude and the new guy, I'm watching Kobe going off for 50, 60, 70, and then eventually 81. And I looked at Jonesy in a commercial break and said, like, this is history. Like, you think I can take a picture or something? Like, can I? He's like, yes, do it. Like, I mean, you kidding me? So I pull out my Samsung flip phone. I still have the picture. I mean, it looks like it was taken on a potato. It's so grainy and whatever else. It was, again, 20 years ago or whatever. Yeah. And I right there, boom, take a picture. And the picture I got is the famous one of Kobe walking off the floor with his finger in the air and whatever else. Like, and that's the statue that's outside Staples Center now, or Crypto. I think it's Crypto now. Anyways, I told that story to Charlie, and he immediately, like, smiling, grinning from ear to ear. He's like, "You were a rook too?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I was like a 30-year-old rookie, but I'm like, yeah, that was my rookie." He's like, "Man, I didn't know we were rookies together." And so that was like, but the reason that moment stands out for me is not just because it's Kobe's 81, but here I am, a kid that was drawn to basketball and drawn to the sport and to the league because of Magic Johnson and the Showtime Lakers. And now I'm sitting courtside in the front row in Los Angeles, 10 feet from the Lakers bench. The visiting radio location in LA at that time, it was Laker bench, 4, maybe 6, but I think 4. I call them Gucci seats, the on-court, courtside seats that are obviously thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. So Lakers bench, 4 seats, press row. And the first 3 seats on press row, closest to the Lakers bench, road radio engineer, road play-by-play broadcasters, 1, 2. And there I am, 10 feet from the bench. And it was in my rookie season. Like, are you kidding me? Like, not only am I here in LA calling games on the court, I'm watching Kobe go for 81 against the team that I'm now working for, or the broadcast that I'm now doing. And on top of all that, when Kobe's checking into the game, like, I know I'm going to do a horrible recreation, but if you watching this right now are me and I'm Kobe, this is literally what I'm looking at right in front of me, like right in front of me. That's him right in my face, checking in every time out of a timeout, putting the rosin on his hands and the dust sprinkling all over my laptop and all over my sheets of paper and everything else. And I'm looking like Kobe is like a foot from me as he's checking into the game, putting up this historic night. So what an unbelievable start to my career. Like, my career had already been almost 10 years in, but this chapter of my career, having that moment and sharing that story with Charlie, and like Charlie just sitting back listening to me. And I'm like, okay, but that's just like, all I was doing was talking. You're the one on the court. You tell your story now, which is clearly more interesting than anything I just told. And then hearing about his perspective of being on the floor and trying to stop Kobe and slow down Kobe and realizing, hey, we're winning this game. Oh, how the heck are we now losing this game? And me telling him about, you realize Kobe scored 28 of the Lakers 31 in the fourth quarter, and he had 50 plus in the second half alone. And he was just blown away that he didn't really truly recognize those numbers. Like, that was certainly an aha moment. I said you have many, but it'd be impossible to not say the championship. Like, clearly, I mean, again, there are many, many, many others, but having a chance to call the championship game and to know that I might have this tiny little sliver of a piece of history, and that my call of the final moments and of the championship being won will go down in the history books, or at least in the radio archives, the audio archives of my call being there, and working that with Jonesy and us having that moment together. And then being on the buses during the parade, doing interviews for Sportsnet on the TV side. And like, it was like the rock star moment. Nobody's cheering for me, which they shouldn't, but I'm looking out and having that, like, again, how's it going to, I shouldn't say nobody, very, very, very few people will ever know what it feels like to be a woman or a man leading, either a solo career or fronting a band and walking out onto a stage to 10, 20, 50,000 people, and the lights go on and, and having everybody just like, I had that moment. Again, they weren't cheering for me, nor should they. They're cheering for the players. They're cheering for the championship. They're cheering for the culmination of all the bumps and bruises and ultimate successes that the team had. But literally millions of people lining the streets of Toronto. And I got to see it from that lens that the players had, because I was on the buses doing the interview. And for the last 2 to 3 hours of the 7-hour parade, I wasn't even really working, because camera batteries had run out, recording space had filled up, and there was literally nothing else we could do except just kind of ride the bus and eventually make our way to City Hall and finally end this 7-hour long parade that was only supposed to be a couple of hours long. So I had the ability to just sit and watch and sit and watch and sit and watch and take it all in, with all of these people just screaming mad, and seeing literally 2 to 3 city blocks deep of throngs and waves of people just trying to cheer on the Raptors. Like, those are those pinch me moments that I will clearly never forget.
It was something. I remember that day so clearly. I remember just walking to City Hall at like 6 a.m., staying at my brother's place, and just knowing that I just had to stand here. And thankfully, I didn't have to go to the bathroom, or other. I don't know how I would go back, and waiting and waiting and waiting. Because, to your point, 7 hours. And I was just like, this is the moment. Like, this is what they worked for. This is what we're here for. There was nothing like it. Nothing.
Yeah, it was incredible. It really was. It really was. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, E. Like, I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories, and everyone go buy this book.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I hope people enjoy it. Thanks very much, Pal.
From calling the Raptors' biggest moments to capturing their stories in print, Eric reminds us that passion isn't just about what you do, it's about what you give back to the game. Be sure to grab your copy of We the Raptors today. Thanks again for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with a fellow Raptor fan. Until next time, I'm Payal, and I'll see you again. Take care.